Good afternoon. So I have the pleasure today to share our experiences evaluating Move to Prosper for the past 4 years. My name is Jason Reece. I'm Vice Provost for Urban Research and Community Engagement and an Associate Professor of City and Regional Planning. My colleague, Dr. Ji-Young Lee, and I led the evaluation efforts of Move to Prosper throughout from the program's inception all the way until the families graduated, and then followed up with our families after graduation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I often get asked, how do you evaluate a program like this, especially such a long-standing intervention, 3+ years? It means staying consistently engaged with the families, triangulating lots of data, things coming from the program itself, interviews, surveys that we regularly did. It means talking to the families, sometimes multiple times a year, for more than 4 years actually. And through this engagement, I also want to note that our families were very kind and considerate in the context of opening up to us, sharing their experiences, and really helping us tell the story of understanding, how does stable, affordable, healthy housing in a nice, safe neighborhood, how it can radically change your life and the trajectory of your children's lives. Next slide, please. So, if you look at the briefing materials, and you've heard many of the kind of bullet points of exceptional outcomes from this program. Increase in credit scores, dramatic increase in income, a great decrease in the amount of emergency room usage, primarily because children with existing respiratory conditions were now in healthy indoor environments. What I'm going to reflect upon today, though, is the process. How did we get from a program 3+ years ago that was new and innovative to the outcomes that we see today? And so reflecting back on the last 4 years of evaluation, I have 5 primary themes that really help explain the theory of change with Move to Prosper. The first thing I'll note is that housing has to come first. To paraphrase one of our families, and one of the parents in our families, I never imagined that the hospital visits would stop, that our overall health would improve, that my stress decreased. When you take housing out of the equation, you can focus on so much more. Within the first 6 months of the program, we noted this really significant decline in the stress levels of parents in the program, primarily because they weren't as worried about potentially being homeless. They also were not worried about the safety of their children, a chronic concern in their previous homes. We also quickly realized that kids who the majority of had some form of respiratory challenge suddenly were healthy. And this is within just a few months of locating into their healthy home. This is because the homes they were in had mold, pests, all types of indoor air quality concerns that were literally making these kids sick. Next slide, please. Second point to remember is that neighborhoods matter. We've known this intuitively. We know this through research going back decades. But we saw this in the context of Move to Prosper and the experience of our families. What really mattered in the neighborhood? Safety. Access to jobs and services, which improved, as well as being able to access high-resourced public institutions, such as public schools. Parents no longer feared for the safety of their children. Children got outside more. Parents felt less stressed. And the enhanced educational environments for kids meant that many of the kids were quickly up to proficiency levels in reading. Kids were aggressively getting into extracurriculars. They were aspiring to careers that they had never really even thought about before. And in some cases, we had children in their old schools who had struggled, who in these higher resourced school districts suddenly were identified as gifted and needing additional types of services so that they can succeed. Next slide, please. About 2 years into the program, we began to see the benefits of the stability that families were experiencing in Move to Prosper. Moms talked about the change in their parenting style to be more effective, the continued reduction in stress, not having to worry about taking kids to the emergency room multiple times a month because of asthma attacks. They were able to focus in on the goal setting that is really essential to this program. And this is where we started to see traction begin to happen, where goals would quickly get achieved, which would then build confidence to move forward and strive for even bigger goals. I think a real testament to that process is the dramatic increase in incomes for families. It's that hope, optimism, and ambition that they were able to strive for because they were secure and stable. Like many Central Ohio families, Move to Prosper families were directly economically impacted by the pandemic. Most of the families lost income, some lost their jobs. None of the families missed a rent payment. That is because of the financial literacy work, the emergency savings that each family saved up for. And as many families noted, the pandemic would have been really scary. It would have been a scary outcome for our family. We could have ended up homeless again if we were not in this program. So that enhanced resilience was really a byproduct of the early years of Move to Prosper. Next slide, please. You have heard a great deal about the coaching element of Move to Prosper, and I want to place emphasis on this. And primarily note that relationships are critical to self-improvement. What we noticed in Move to Prosper, there were really two aspects of relationships that were important. The first, the relationships among the parents in the families. They built their own supportive community as they reflected upon shared challenges and talked about dreams that they hoped to accomplish. But also the relationship between coaches and the family members. The coaches were not just there for supportive services, but as an accountability partner to keep pushing, to help those families set those goals, hit those milestones to achieve those goals along the way. And so you can't separate out the importance of personal relationships, social capital, in the context of helping families thrive. Next slide, please. My final note here is that transformative change, like you've seen in many of the data points today that families have experienced, takes a bit of time. What we documented in this process is that it took a few years for families to get stable, and then to use that stability to leverage that stability to achieve new goals and build confidence and achieve even greater goals going forward. Also, an important thing to note, Move to Prosper offers a great deal of flexibility. We've always wondered to a degree, what happens if we remove the benefit cliff? And for those who are not familiar, the benefit cliff is the risk of losing programmatic supports, or let's say housing assistance, if your income increases. Move to Prosper did not have this limitation, so families could really strive. They could take risks economically without having to worry about that risk setting them back. And so when you look at the dramatic increase in incomes for these families, recognize that the avoidance of the benefit cliff was a major reason why they were able to take the strides that they did, to take the risks that they did, which paid off in a dramatic way.